webpage.
Yeah, it's the document I sent to the chair. So
Yeah.
We're going live now.
Are we on?
Yes.
Okay, welcome back. We're continuing our meeting with Joint Justice Oversight. And this afternoon, we're going to be talking about, starting off talking about the role of our state deputies within the state. And we do have some folks on Zoom as well as here in the committee room. So I want to welcome all of you on Zoom. And the testimony that we have scheduled was Stephanie Barrett.
That's fine. Would you want me to come up and go over that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yes, please.
I wasn't exactly clear on why I was scheduled, but
I think there was a little confusion in this section of, but we do have a document that you've submitted. It is on our Justice Oversight Committee webpage. And this is dealing with DMH and DCF rates on transports. And this would be the state paid deputies in the court and DOC transports.
so when you had your, I'm Stephanie Barrett from the Joint Fiscal Office. When you had your discussion on this topic last month, you did ask the question about what is the rate for basically DCF and mental health, the contract rate. And so the document you have in front of you, if everyone has that up, it's under my name in the under today's. If you're on the committee page. Please. Yeah, okay. So the DCF and it has the more sort of specified pieces in the contract. So it's they don't spend a whole lot of their budget on transports. It's about 61,000 is what's budgeted a year in transports. But the rate that they pay to sheriffs, you can see listed there. Listed there. It's almost $700 for a day for providing safe temporary locations. And then there's the base rate of $65 an hour for sheriffs staff time on non-holiday regular weekday working. And then it goes up based on if it's a late at night, 12 a.m. to 7 a.m. It goes up to $82.50, $130 for an hour on holidays from 7 a.m. to midnight, and then even $165 an hour if it's from 12 a.m. to 7 a.m. On a holiday.
So Stephanie,
Yeah.
these rates are paid regardless of the county that the deputy sheriff is housed in.
It's
correct?
whatever, so DCF is contracting with the sheriff to safely transport someone that's in their custody.
Regardless of what county that sheriff is.
Yes,
So Windsor County would get the same rate as Chittenden County.
yes. And then in mental health, they actually spend more money on transports. They spend $215,000 a year on transports. And they're mostly paying at that $65, normal 7 a.m. to midnight rate that DCF is paying. There is a 1.5 time increase for holiday pay. But they don't have as far as I know, the nearly $700 providing a safe temporary location per day amount. But that was just to give you a picture of what's budgeted in total in those two budgets for transports, and then the rates that generate that expenditure.
Is there any money in DOC that goes for transports in their budget?
I didn't check. I'll check with Matt.
I think DOC does its own transports, don't they?
If it's
Between facilities.
I have to do their own. Their people do that, but the state paid deputies are the ones that are transporting a DOC person from a DOC facility to a court.
So that must come out, that comes out of DOC's budget.
No, it's the value of it's what you pay the sheriffs, the state paid deputies, the budget, the $2 million that pays for the state paid deputies in the budget. That's what they do.
And so oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm processing that.
So the dollar amounts that you've outlined here, that would be when there's not a state paid deputy transporting?
So the state paid deputies don't transport the mental health and the DC necessarily. The state paid deputy's job is to transport the DOC folk. But
Well, according to their testimony, it's all three, but,
if they're court related.
right. So I guess that doesn't really answer my question. So,
Okay.
so these rates here that you've outlined here for both of these departments, is that when it's not a state paid deputy transporting?
Yes.
Okay,
So if it's a state paid deputy transport, it's a $2 million line item.
So that
In
the
the budget.
cost of the state paid deputies is $2 million in the sheriff's line item. The budget, the state budget,
And it does not include the 61,000
or the
or
200,000.
the 200.
Do we pay for the vacancies as well?
We budget the amount for the state paid deputies. If there's a vacancy, that money remains at the sheriff's line item budget. It's not, you don't send the money out to, if there's not a position filled, it wouldn't be at the carry forward, the unused amount wouldn't be at the sheriff's office, it would be in the state, because it's a state paid deputy. So it'd be in the sheriff's line item of the budget.
I just don't know where to go with this.
Well, let me make a proposal and then people can shoot it down and do whatever they want with it. I'd like to propose that the state paid deputies be, the responsibility be transferred from the 14 individual sheriffs to the Department of State Attorneys and Sheriffs, determining the actual number that they need in order to do it, and how we could work with DCF and DMH to also provide transports. And that the sheriffs, and work either that or individual sheriffs could bid on the whole thing. But, you know, it's, I think having 14 different sheriffs with state paid deputies is confusing and difficult. I know that the Department of State Attorneys and Sheriffs would probably need at least one or two of those positions just to coordinate transport. But it seems to me that that would be one way to do it. I know there's a concern about the money that the sheriffs have invested in cars and other infrastructure. So that can be reimbursed through the vacancy savings some way, but that's just a proposal to throw out there to get a discussion going and see where you want to go.
So that the deputy sheriffs would then become employees of the Department of,
Or the state.
employees of the state, and they will be under the Department of Sheriffs and State's Attorneys
Mhm.
and funded through their budget.
Which could organize so that all the deputy transports are done. Just, possible through DMH. I don't know what, I realize there's probably holes in that proposal, but I think the current program is, as I said, when you looked at the numbers during COVID, and with the increase in the number, a decrease, in the number of transports due to video arraignments.
For different types of transport.
Yeah, and you've got your, each individual sheriff having one or two, or in the case of Chittenden, 6.
So you keep either 25 positions or
Well,
whatever,
maybe 20.
or 20,
and,
whatever. 'cause you've got
Whatever
some
they want to
vacancies
propose
now.
as part of their budget.
And then you've got the sheriffs out of the loop, and you've got the deputy sheriffs answering to,
Oh, they could either become state employees or
Yeah.
employees of the department. I mean, John Campbell's not, he's a state employee, right?
John Campbell is, yes, as the director of.
And Annie Noonan and the other members who work for them, so that would make sense to. I'm looking at Annie and
I know, and then it would be up to the department to,
not picking on you, Annie, I just was looking at you.
and then it would be up to the department to divvy up the workload
Yeah.
for the deputy sheriffs. And then the sheriff is not in the loop, is not in there. The question is, what do you do with vehicles and uniforms and all of that?
Mhm.
If we propose it, it gets people engaged.
Well, at least it gets discussion going and the various committees, the appropriations and government operations and whatever else.
Mhm.
It-
Discussion?
Would our role be sort of similar to what we were discussing this morning on the other topic, that we'd be sending a memo to the relevant committees, with this thought or idea? I mean, I think something
Probably.
different than what is going on now needs to happen. And some variation of senators' thoughts, I think, is a good one, frankly, myself.
For the folks who choose. Anyone on Zoom, Senator Parent, Senator Lyons, or Senator Baruth, want to weigh in on that proposal? Corey?
I don't know if I support that yet, but I do think we need further exploration on the issue. So I could support a memo saying, exploring making them state employees under the Department of, State's Attorney and Sheriffs.
Okay. Other folks? Jenny?
Yeah, I think this is one approach. There may be other approaches, and there certainly is there's a lot of a number of issues that need to be considered when the discussion goes on. For example, how do you train people to transport difficult cases? So I think having something in a recommendation that suggests reevaluation of what currently goes on. One approach might being the one that Senator Sears has suggested, and I'm all for sending that out.
Yeah, if I could
Sure.
just add, it's that specific proposal is something I'd like to talk with my sheriff about. Because as Senator Sears said, there may be holes in it that we're not seeing. With that said, I would support a letter that made it clear that this was a possible proposal and we were interested in others that could solve the problem as well. I wouldn't want the letter to suggest that this was the thrust of the committee's thinking because it just got laid on the table.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree with that approach. One of the things I just wanted to mention is that I think that one of the positive aspects of, I'm not generally a centralization kind of person, but with respect to what Senator Lyons was saying, the need for some specialized training for some of the populations that we're talking about in terms of the transportation issues and, dealing with folks with mental health challenges or children or youth experiencing challenges in their life at that point. I feel like the training could be better accomplished if they're and more consistently accomplished rather than spreading it out among 14 different county, responsible sheriff's office, to have that centralized and have that be something that is accomplished in that way. I just think that would be more consistent and lend us to having more respectful transports in some of those cases. But I agree. We haven't, investigated that option enough, but I think that some changes, and this being one of the options to investigate, I think would be good.
I mean, one of the other possibilities would be to have sheriffs bid for certain geographic sections of the state that they would want to cover. I mean, it's a lot of different.
Yeah, there's other options.
And I don't think mine is necessarily the best or the only one, but I'm happy to hear what Sheriff Markey or Annie has comments on that. They both have been involved in this discussion.
Would either one of you want to comment? Sheriff Marcoux, are you?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I can't speak to how many sheriffs would be interested in doing that. I know that there's quite a few that wouldn't. I'll just while you're thinking about this here, just bring out the fact that although we're concentrating on those 25 state paid deputies, the sheriff's involvement is crucial because there's that many and more per diem deputies that are necessary to complete all of these transports. So if we were to move them in any other agency, that's additional people power that we're going to have in order to complete those transports safely. So, as I said, I think that there's quite a few sheriffs that are not interested in contracting. However, only speaking as the Lamoille County Sheriff, be interested to see, if we're going to do something different, what that looks like. Really, hopefully remaining at the table with the committee in order to point out shortfalls or possible unintended consequences or positives out of every proposal. So hopefully hopefully somewhere in there I answered the original question.
Yeah, I think so. Would you agree that something needs to change?
In my opinion, it does. But again, there was, I had quite a lot of pushback from some sheriffs after the last meeting. We need something with a great degree of clarity as to what state paid deputies are allowed to do and not allowed to do. And we need that in either statutorily written or in some other way, because there's a lot of ambiguity in the way that it's written now. I do believe that state paid deputies, when they're not working, transporting prisoners to and from court, that they should be available to help out with DCF and other state-related transports. Again, that is me speaking. And I've been on for 21 years as the sheriff, so here in Lamoille, and it's just my observations. But I believe that it's time to take a look and clarify some of the language.
Annie, do you want to weigh in?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I just want to echo what Sheriff Marcoux just said. I think it's really important that we look at the statutory language as to what they are permitted to do. I absolutely believe that they could be could and should be, and some sheriffs, I think, have embraced this as sort of broadening out the scope to assist other state agencies and departments, whether it be DMH or Department of Corrections. That is really critical. When you look at, I looked at the legislative report that was filed in conjunction with DOC and the courts and everything that went back, and the data that was from that. In 2018, you had 6,700 transports. The vast majority of those were criminal transports, meaning they were moving people from the correctional facilities to court. So there were like 5,600 of those, but only 137 juveniles and only 64 mental health transports. Sheriff Marcoux mentioned that we need to use the per diems to assist, and there was almost $300,000 worth of per diem assistance used. So when they are used when either the transports in most cases should be safely done and often need two people. So sometimes they need to pull a per diem in to be the second person on a transport. So I think that the staffing would need to be looked at. I absolutely agree with that. I absolutely think we should utilize the positions as broadly and to the best ability if we can to serve state government when we can. This joint employer relationship situation has created problems. I'm going to just say that. And that Supreme Court decision, which sort of said, well, you've got this municipal piece over here, but there's state employees over here. That's just been creating more problems. I think that one of the things that's important to note is that most of the people that are currently serving as state transport deputies are level 3 certified, trained through the Vermont Criminal Justice Training Council. And that is something that I think has been helpful to the department and to the sheriffs themselves, particularly in dealing with out-of-state transports or extraditions. The issue about the car cost is real. I want to echo what Sheriff Marcoux said on that. We don't own, the state doesn't provide the cars for those transports, the sheriffs do. So that would need to be in the equation. And the per diem rate has not gone up for a really long time. And I know Sheriff Harlow is on the phone with us. And I know Jen has talked to me a lot about what it costs her sometimes when she's using the cars and per diems and stuff. Right now it's, I think $22 or $24 an hour, and that's just not covering the cost of when they have to pull people into work. So there are all of those things, but I agree with Senator Sears that there are potentially many, many ways to look at this, but status quo should not be one of them, in my view. I really feel that the statutory language could be broadened, and we need some ability to say, hey, we are going to do this and we're going to help in this other arena. And right now, I know the department doesn't have the authority to direct that and those positions. And I think that there would and could have been some better utilization, particularly during the many, many months of the COVID shutdown. So I agree with Senator Sears in that there has to be either a different construct and maybe a combination of a different construct and different funding and more funding in some ways, but also some authority to basically step in and say, we need help. We need to be using these positions more broadly and to the better of this tax, I think of to the taxpayers.
Thank you. And then we have, I can barely make, Jennifer, is it I can't make out the name. Harlow? Is there any, would you care to weigh in at all?
Morning, Madam
not?
Chair. I really agree with Annie, and I think that there's a lot of moving pieces to this, so I would definitely want to take a lot into consideration, but I'm mostly in agreement with everything that Annie has said. I've talked to her repeatedly. Being a brand new sheriff, being new to this position, I really believe that the state deputies should be used more broadly and benefit everyone involved if we continue with this. So thank you.
So what I'm thinking is we could at least get a draft memo written up to respective committees. I would assume it's the appropriations committees as well as the government operations committees
And maybe judiciary.
and judiciary. To really reevaluate the role of the deputy sheriffs and the funding mechanisms.
Well, I think judiciary only in terms of the court appearances and court, the use of the video arraignment, et cetera, is where our expertise is, and the courts need to be taken into consideration. And how I know one of the frustrations that I've talked to many sheriffs about, including Sheriff Marcoux, is they take somebody to court and get them there at 8:30 a.m. and the arraignment doesn't take place until 1:30 p.m. And so that two state paid deputies are sitting there for hours, just waiting for the court to deal with it. These are some of the things that the status quo is just not acceptable. So I'm more than satisfied with the statement that clearly states that the status quo is no longer acceptable. And some of the alternatives would be more clearly defining the role of the deputy, the state paid deputy, transferring responsibility to the agency, the Department of State's attorneys and sheriffs, any of those options, but they should all be looked at. But what I think both the sheriff and Annie have stated is that the status quo is no longer acceptable.
So I'm looking at Michelle, and I'm looking at Damien too. Is
Well,
that,
I'd like to put in a drafting request, Damien, so. And Michelle.
Do you want us to switch places?
well, I'm just thinking of our next meeting. You're up next anyway on fines and fees. So I'm just thinking of our actions for our next meeting, which is our last meeting before January. If we want to do a memo similar to what we just did for the sealing of records, if we wanted to do a memo to the respective committees to look at these these areas and reevaluate how we use our deputy sheriffs. Would folks want to do that or not?
I'm good with, actually, I think Damien took notes of some of his comments. That, I think what both Sheriff Marcoux and Annie said should be part of that record, not necessarily what exactly who is attributed to, but that there should probably be legislative description of the job. What do we expect the state paid deputy to do? What do they do when they're not transporting? How can we speed up the court process? Our state police have cars and we provide those vehicles for all state employees. So that's, that would be one consideration.
Mhm.
That's a very real to cars, but.
So I'm seeing two things. One, you requested a drafting request,
Yeah,
which is one track. The other track is, should we as a Justice Oversight Committee submit a memo to those respective committees saying, look at this broader scope?
I'm good with
That's our
that.
charge, right?
That's our charge, yeah.
Yes.
So Damien and Michelle, do you have enough information to down into a
We'll
memo?
talk amongst ourselves and Stephanie and other people. I mean, it sounds as, I don't have any background in this, but as I'm listening to all of this, it seems like more kind of, especially as you're looking at, well, what is the role of deputies in general and articulating that in statute, that maybe that's pretty, it's GovOps. And so I might chat with Amarin and so we'll sort it out and somebody will circle back so that you guys can talk about it next week.
Okay.
And we should probably circle back with you more directly, Senator Sears, on the drafting or
Okay.
stuff, figure out the details,
Makes sense.
figure out where that will go.
Great. Anything else on this one? We've got a pass. Okay, let's shift to going right along here. We have Stephanie giving us an update, which is one of our requirements, an update on the criminal justice fines and fees.
So Dan Dickerson from our office should pop in momentarily. He and I are working on this.
Okay, so is he gonna be here at 2 or can he?
No, well, I wasn't able to come earlier. He said he was going to be coming right over. So, but I can start if that doesn't preference of the committee. We put language in the budget to look at criminal justice fines, fees, and penalties, looking at basically an inventory, looking back 5 years, what did the revenue generate, and then projecting forward 5 years. And then basically an inventory of what programs get funded by the criminal justice fines, fees, and penalties, and any alternative funding ideas that we might have for those programs. And so we started with the judiciary, and Greg Mosley met with us a week or two ago, and he is generating the past the past 5 years of information, both what revenue came in and how much was assessed, because you assess a fee, fine, penalty, but you don't necessarily collect those dollars in the same year or in some cases ever.
Is that like a restitution? Is that part of, or no? Is that,
Restitution is a separate piece, but the surcharges, and we are including everything that goes through the judicial bureau. So some of them are like the traffic fines, which fund a lot of things, but may not be necessarily criminal in that. And so that is one of the sort of things to think about, is that in accounting terms, that aging those accounts receivable, and the process around when and if they can be, what we do for collections, if that can be improved. And we still have to find out how they're carried on the CAFR year in, year out. I imagine they're carried with a significant, write-off type of thing, the older pieces. There's that. We just started. Want to just pull up the chair?
Oh, sure.
I was just explaining that we met with Greg Mosley at Corrections to talk through.
Judiciary.
Yes, the judiciary, sorry, back in the old
days, yeah.
So that's, and we've had a conversation with Crime Victim Services regarding what they're seeing, and we sort of expanded the context there to their federal grants. We still have on tap to meet with Annie at the state's attorney side and the victim advocate side programmatically. And the one thing I wanted to sort of remind folks is that certain surcharges are allocated, earmarked to specific programs, but the vast majority of judiciary fees go into the general fund. They don't necessarily get linked up to a specific program. They are just part of the general revenue of the state. And so that, when we get into their, and they're the longest list of their fees and fines, we're not necessarily going to say that where it's statutorily earmarked, we'll be identifying a program that earmark funds. But if it's not, there's not, we wouldn't say that X amount of general fund comes from judiciary fines and therefore it funds the judiciary. That's that we wouldn't be linking it up to any specific program in the state. It would just be broad across all the use of general fund in the state.
So you've started doing your work in this, correct?
We've
When I look
started.
at the language that's in our charge in the
Yeah.
appropriations bill, this is, sounds like it's the beginning, because what will then happen is options will be offered for alternative funding sources for some of the programs for the 2023 legislative sessions. So I'm interpreting that your sheriff force is starting to reach out to the entities to gather all the information.
I don't have the language in front of me. Does it say the 23?
As options for alternative funding sources for these programs for consideration in the 2023 legislative.
I mean, that might be a budget, that might be a drafting error. We might have.
Would that be for FY 23?
It might be FY 20, maybe we intended FY 23 budget. We're assuming that we're putting this out in December.
Yeah, for the 2022 session.
Yeah.
Because, okay, because this comes from the appropriations bill, the big bill.
I do remember reading the 2022 dating, that was a lot.
So
I have a feeling it was one of the last things that went into the budget bill.
Really? Yeah, I get it.
I believe.
So it's for the
So we
FY
meant to say the
23
FY 23 budget instead of the 2023 session.
Okay.
Yeah,
We kind of probably wish match the two things together. The 23 budget and the 22 session are actually the things that are the same.
Yeah,
essentially.
okay. So, but it would be your office making those.
We would be making it, and I just, my point previously was that, there are some areas where there are specific programs funded with particularly surcharges, but there are not a lot of programs, even though we're seeing a decline in, revenue that's going into the general fund, there's not a programmatic link to that piece that's going into the general fund. And so the program side of it will be pretty narrow.
Yeah, the judiciary's budget doesn't hinge on the amount of revenue that it brings in through those fees, because they're just asking for a general fund allocation. Generally, the general fund's very large.
Are some of these fees? We used to have a fee bill every year on a 3-year cycle, and we haven't had that for a number of years. Are some of these fees connected to that normal cycle of our fee bill? Or are some of these fees regardless of that?
Those fees are reported every 3 years. So the way there's the executive branch fee report, and there's the fee bill. And so the executive branch is required to report on fees in specific areas of government every year. And so the goal is that every 3 years, each area of government is going to report. And so the last time that these sorts of criminal justice fees were reported outside of the judiciary was 2019, I believe. And so we would hopefully see in 2022 those fees reported from the executive branch in the fee report, but then you'll also see them reported in our issue brief. And then from the fee report, the executive branch can also submit a fee request where they would propose fees that would go up or down, depending on the budget need. But we haven't seen a fee bill proposed by the administration
For a
since.
number of years, but that's what my question is, are any of these fees tied to?
If you were going to change those fees, you would probably do it in a fee bill structure or a specific judiciary if they were on the judiciary.
Because the
branch.
fees aren't going towards a specific program to fund that program.
Well, whether or not you take up a fee bill as a body, as a legislative body, is your prerogative. The normal process in the past, any type of fee has been that the executive branch comes forward with a recommendation, but you can, of your own, decide that we are going to look at fees and adjust the statutory levels of those fees, or propose new fees or whatever, what have you. That's separate from the discussion of whether or not a particular fee in statute that exists, however much revenue it may generate, funds a program, or it's the proceeds of that fee go into the general revenue pot.
And-
Maxine?
Yeah, and isn't the question also though whether we should continue using fees and surcharges to fund, for instance, the Center for Crime Victim Services? Is that the best?
Yeah.
Is that the best
And I
way?
would say, at least in the case of crime victim services, if you just raise those surcharges, I don't think that would solve anything, because the instances of those surcharges being paid has been dropping
Right.
pretty steadily. So I don't think just raising new revenue would be the solution. I think the language sort of recognizes that, new solutions are needed, or new options are needed.
And we hope to lay that out in the context of the issue brief, particularly crime victim services and the revenue that they get from the state, which is a relatively modest general fund appropriation. The relationship of how they pay for the victims advocates, and then the volatility of federal funds that they have faced and are likely to face, because that seems to be the new norm, is sort of a not very consistent picture in that arena.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, it's a real circular problem, because the victims, the offenders can't afford to pay frequently when they're assessed. Then so these large surcharges and fines, many times the surcharges are much higher than the fines. And they just continue to grow. And that becomes frustration. But when it's not paid, or when the numbers aren't there because we're diverting people, the programs that rely on the fines and the surcharges are not able to get the money they need to operate. And so it's just a cycle and I don't know how to get off that cycle. other than using general fund money, many of these programs were such good ideas. But back when we started them, we didn't have the money to start them. So we said, okay, well, let's use fines.
Right.
And now, the fines aren't being paid. I know that I've actually had towns who complain about their fine money going down from traffic tickets and not getting collected. So, yeah, it's just. I don't know how.
You know, the experience of that is what we intend to lay out in the context of the issue brief.
I don't know that there's a solution other than taking more general fund money and using it to fund these programs. And not doing something else.
I mean, we've asked, for example, a portion of the marriage license fee goes for domestic violence programming. Are there other sort of broader, not criminal justice tied, but social tied activities that you could tap into to find? I mean, it's part of the charge to think that way.
Put a fee on guns. Put a fee on gun sales. Bowling or biking. So is joint fiscal going to be offering, I mean, this charge is that you would be presenting an inventory of programs that would be supported by revenues, that you're gonna put in some options for alternative funding. So you're on the course to do that for the FY23 budget.
For the 23 budget we in December, is that the plan?
December.
We would have the issue brief to you in December, and then you would take, to the extent that you're inclined to take up the topics that are included in that issue brief session, it would be for this 2022 session, FY23 year, or whatever you determine.
Okay, because we're not going to be meeting in December. Our last meeting will be next week. So that's why we asked you to come in November to get a feel. So when it is ready in December, the best thing.
We will.
And we should report that they should read the issue brief.
Is section E, 127.2.
Yeah.
Of the appropriations bill.
I think it says we report in November or December.
November or December.
Yeah. And we just assumed you were meeting in December.
Yeah, well, we did too, but we're not. But that can be submitted electronically.
Yes,
probably to
and
Peggy
disseminated
Delaney.
to the committee.
Just to Peggy.
It doesn't require action.
No.
It just requires us reporting it to you.
Yes. And that's why we asked you to come in today, so at least you physically reported, but when you do get
when the brief is actually.
When the brief is actually printed, to submit it to Peggy Delaney, and then Peggy can get it out to us.
Yeah.
Because we don't have to take any action on it, since we have to receive it. Any further questions from folks?
Yeah, not a question about this, but
Okay.
sometimes I think we have a tendency when we have a tough issue to put it on, punt and put it on to this committee.
Yeah.
And which I'm not sure we were designed, this committee was designed for that type of problem, but it is a definite problem. It only comes up when you talk about expungement, for example, and you've got before you a woman who could get her record expunged. State's attorney doesn't have a problem, but her surcharge is so high.
Yep.
And her job is so low wage that she just can't afford to do that. So she can't get a new job because she can't get her record expunged, and she can't get her record expunged because she can't pay the surcharge. And you can't waive the surcharge. And if you waive the surcharge, then the Center for Crime Victim Services doesn't get the money they need, or whatever group is funded by.
Or
It's
track,
really,
or your license, if you have.
or your license.
you know.
So, I remember we had a public hearing in Winooski on expungement just before the pandemic hit in February of 2020. And we had testimony from this woman who the only thing that was keeping her from being a much higher paid job was surcharges. and nobody could forgive the surcharge.
You know, and that
But
places.
if we put in the law that you forgive the surcharge,
Right.
then these programs wouldn't get the
When
money.
you get the money. And the same thing happens with folks who need to get their driver's license back.
Yep.
And they have fines or surcharges on it, then they can't, they've met all the other requirements, but they can't get a new driver's license, which then keeps them from work. I tried to address that one too. Well, good luck when they send the report, good luck.
Well,
I think we set our priorities and fund them.
but yeah,
Yeah. But Dick, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I remember years ago, the money isn't in the budget in one program to get started to help something, so you set up a fee that's to support that program.
Yep.
And then you're not able to, you can set a fee, but you can't get money from a stone. So that completes our work for today. And we worked with Michelle earlier this morning about our agenda for our meeting next Friday. And I think we have a pretty full agenda.
Yep, and Julie and I spoke about it. I think I was just emailing back with Peggy. I think Peggy either is going to be out next week or working remotely all next week. So we'll work that out. And somebody will be in touch by then.
So we're gonna get more clarification on Rule 74 with the
Yep,
parties.
and have those three parties kind of come in, but hopefully they're gonna, who's gonna reach out to them about how do you? The woman
I think, yeah, she was gonna
She
reach
was
out.
gonna do that.
Yeah. And then we're gonna also look at transports for the deputy sheriffs in terms of a memo.
Mhm.
And,
I've been emailing with Ameren.
okay,
And so Ameren and Damon and I are gonna meet on Monday. So it does sound as though kind of the scope of it is really kind of more focused on, you know, the GovOps stuff and so, and identifying the duties and some of those things.
okay. I'm wondering if you even had a rough draft done, like maybe on a Thursday, you could just send it out to members here so we could take a look at it prior to the meeting on Friday in case there's major changes, if it's done. If it isn't, that's fine. And then
It didn't sound to me so much major changes other than identifying, to me, identifying the issues that need to be examined. But if there are certain ones that I missed around like that you wanted, let me know.
Okay, and if you sent that out to all the committee members. And then the Criminal Justice Training Council, their report on what they're doing for,
Julie's emailing them to let them know, we know that the report isn't due till December 1st, but asking if they can come in and just give you a preview.
preview, a barometer check. Okay, anything else? And for folks on the Zoom world, thank you. And if next meeting, we may have to take more votes. So if you can, if people can be present, that would be terrific.
I should be able to be there next meeting.
You will or will not?
I will.
You will.
Yeah, I plan to be there as
How to
well.
accommodate this.
I plan to be there as well next meeting.
Okay. And Corey,
I
you
do
can
as
bring
well.
your little ones. You can bring your little ones if you wanted to.
I'm sure they wouldn't be that excited.
Plexiglass, they put plexiglass glass between Corey and the gallery because they saw how many people were trying to grab him. So, you know, you're gonna be much safer this term.
That's a good thing.
There's nothing else for us to do today. I think we can adjourn. And then we'll see everyone next week on Friday at